Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this 8th and last webinar in the Monroe Forensic Actuaries series called the Uncertainty Series. It certainly has been an uncertain time. We're in day 21 of lockdown. It would have actually been the end today, but we've got to all hold on for another 2 weeks. So I'm trusting that you are well and trusting that you are safe. And I hope that you're going to enjoy exploring this topic with me. It's slightly more technical than the topics we've covered so far in the series, but it's one that I'm particularly passionate about, so I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. Just a few housekeeping things to mention before I start. You all are muted and your videos are off. It just helps with the buffering and the sequencing to make sure everything runs smoothly. But at the bottom of your screen, sometimes it's at the top, but I think it'll be at the bottom, there's a chat button and a Q&A button. So if you've got any more general topics, maybe connectivity or something like that, you can use the chat box to chat. And then there's a Q&A section. If you leave your questions there, then at the end of the presentation, I'm going to get back to you with answers on those questions. You do have the option to ask anonymously or as yourself. If you do it as yourself, then we can see your email address. So if there's then a question that I can't answer on the webinar, then I can email you the answer. So please do it as yourself. I'm just making sure that you are able to see my screen. Right, the second thing is, let me just have a look at this chat. Okay, no, we're all good. The second thing is to mention is that at the end of the webinar, you will see that there's a quick survey that you can complete. Please stay online and just complete that survey for us. It just helps us to serve you better and to understand what you thought of this webinar and what we can do in the future to add value to you. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Eddie Teron, and I'm an actuary at Monroe Forensic Actuaries. I've been with this firm for about 4 years, before starting off overseas for 4 years, and then I spent about 12 years at Old Mutual before I came here. I spend most of my time in the investment industry, and I have a particular passion for helping people make decisions when it comes to financial advice, and especially investment advice. I also have a strong anti-passion for people that give bad investment advice. So this has driven me to be able to give licensed financial advice. I started a firm called Convergency Wealth about 4 years ago, who's a licensed financial services provider. So I am able to give regulated financial advice as well. I do need to say that Convergency Wealth and Monroe Forensic Actuaries are 100% independent, and that we take client confidentiality and potential conflicts of interests very seriously. So the topic for today, the pros and cons of a Curator Bonus compared to a trust, is quite a complex one. And I realized as I was preparing for this webinar that it probably needs more than one webinar. I'm hoping to be about 30 or 40 minutes, and I can never go into all the detail that I would want to in the 30 or 40 minutes. So I'm going to have to skim over a lot of the detail. And if I just look at our agenda there, I'll just frame the context, and we'll briefly go through the first or the next 2 sections of the definitions and the workings and the pros and cons of a Curator Bonus and a trust. I specifically want to get to, or let me rather explain this in the context. I'll then go into the investment implications and important investment principles, end off with a conclusion and then get back to your questions that you might have asked during the presentation. I'm just quickly going to check in on our attendees to see how many of you have joined. Okay, it's great to see that there are quite a few of you. Right, so let's frame the context. The context is a litigated damages claim where an individual has suffered a financial loss and where the individual is unable to take care of his or her own financial affairs. And that could be because of disability, of mental illness, or the fact that the claimant could be a minor. And as most of you know, there's two ways to facilitate looking after this claimant's financial affairs, and that being either through the appointment of a curator bonus or through the establishment of a trust. So the purpose of this webinar is to look into the pros and cons of those, but I'm applying a very specific lens. I'm applying an investment lens to this discussion, and I'm going to leave the legal and the practical lens aside for now. I'm going to briefly cover those at the start, but that will possibly be the topics for another webinar, is to go into more detail on the legal and the practical side of this discussion. I'm going to focus on the investment side. So let's jump in. Let's define what a curator bonus is. A curator is someone that's appointed to safeguard another's financial affairs, whether it's financial, personal, or otherwise. And I'm not going to talk through the details of a curator ad litem, bonus, and ad personam. I trust that the audience is well versed in those. The appointment of a curator bonus could happen in two ways: through application to the High Court, or through the appointment in terms of the Mental Health Care Act. And then when it comes to remuneration, the remuneration is specified at 6% of the annual income and 2% of the termination fee, and that's 2% of the capital value at when the arrangement is terminated. There could also be a special fee that applies upon application, but I won't go into further detail on that. The powers and responsibilities are to receive, take care of, and control and administer all the assets of, let's call it the claimant, to carry on or to discontinue any trade or business or undertaking, to acquire any property, movable or immovable, for the benefit of the estate, to apply any money for the maintenance, support, or towards the benefit of the person, to invest or to reinvest any funds, and then to lodge an annual account with the master. And then importantly, as part of that lodging, evidence that any investments that have been made into non-speculative assets where capital is guaranteed. So I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time on this requirement and how this requirement relates to what is available when a trust is set up. So moving on to trusts in terms of the definition and workings, a trust is a agreement between a settler, excuse me, a settler and trustees for the benefit of third parties. And the trust and the terms of that agreement is usually set out in the purpose of the trust, or the agreement is set out in the trust deed, and that covers the purpose of the trust, the manner the trust must be governed, and also what the power of the trustees are. Trusts are governed by the Trust Property Control Act of 57. And you get different types of trusts, which I'm not going to go into detail of. Mortis causa trusts, inter vivos, discretionary trusts, Bevin trusts, charitable trusts, etc. The role players in a trust are the settler, the founder, the donor, trustees, beneficiaries. The master of the High Court plays a role, And then a case manager. A case manager is something that I've come into contact with, especially in the context of medical negligence claims. And the mechanism of a trust allows other experts like a case manager to also have a say, whether that's a formal legal say in the form of a trustee, or just a expert giving input into the management of the trust through the trustees. The remuneration of trusts are not regulated by the authority, and there's quite a wide variance in the ways that trusts or trustees are remunerated and what trusts cost to set up. The industry standard is to apply a percentage on both. A percent is that the fee is a percentage of capital, both at the acceptance and then a percentage of the assets ongoing. So an annual fee of say 1 to 2% per year. And then there could be a fee similar to the Curator Bonus of 1 to 2% on the distribution of capital. There are other models that exist. There are models where there's no percentage fee that applies to the assets in the trust, where there's only a fixed rand amount to set up the trust, which could range between 2 and 7,000 rand. And then there's a fixed rand amount for that goes to a professional trustee to be a trustee on the trust. And these could range from 500 to 1,000 rand per month. Trust financials needs to be audited, so trust also needs to allow for a cost for audit fees of could it be anything between 5 and 10,000 rand per year. The duties of trustees are wide, and this slide and the next, judging by the number of bullets there, you can see that it is a big responsibility to be a trustee on a trust. I'm not going to talk through and read through those duties, but I did want to put them in the slides so that you could come back and view them. Which just reminds me that these webinars are recorded, and if you would like to receive a copy of the recording, you're welcome to email us and we can send that on to you. Excuse me just for a second. Right. So now that we've looked at the definitions, let's look at some of the pros and cons. On the Curator Bonus side, advantages are mentioned that there's stricter monitoring through the master, through the provision of the annual accounts, and some would say that there's more control in terms of what investments can be made by the curator and ultimately for the benefit of the claimant. There's an argument for lower fees. Why I've put a question mark there is it's always interesting to me when there's a percentage fee that applies to the capital left at the end of an arrangement. I'll leave it there. It's just an interesting concept to me. And then on the disadvantages, the biggest disadvantage that I'm going to focus on is the limited investment scope and the fact that the master requires a curator bonus to invest in guaranteed investments, which does very much limit the potential return that the claimant can earn on the capital that is invested. Prior consent is needed for certain transactions. There's no clawback option. So again, in the context of medical negligence claims, the example could be a cerebral palsy case where an amount of money is there to look after a claimant for his or her life, and when that person dies earlier than expected, there's an amount of money left. Now, under a curator bonus, that amount would fall into that person's estate and would be distributed according to his or her will. Whereas if a trust was set up, the trust could be set up in such a way so that that money is returned to the Department of Health, for example. So it's a way to limit costs and to make sure that capital doesn't flow, or rather, let me say that capital flows only to the purpose for which the capital is there. I know that there's quite a struggle to find curators, and that there's not many people that's willing to do it. I've mentioned the termination fee and the conflict of interest there. And then if the curator dies, then a new application needs to be made. So it's not the same as a trust. A trust exists outside of the people, the trustees. So a trust would not terminate if there's a change in trustees. Then turning to a trust, I've already alluded to that it's a very powerful mechanism for estate and family succession planning. It offers a lot of flexibility that can be written into the trust deed. An example would be that clawback that I was talking about now. It's safe and secure in terms of asset protection. It offers very good privacy. And then importantly for this discussion, it does allow a much wider investment scope. So there's no restrictions on what investments can be made within the trust, which in most cases are beneficial to the claimant. The disadvantages are the unregulated trust fees that I mentioned. So one would need to be careful to make sure that your fees are more the second model that I was talking about, and not necessarily a percentage of assets. Higher tax rates could apply on retained income within the trust if it's not a special trust. A special trust would be set up in most cases that I'm talking about here, where there's a disabled person or a minor. So in those cases, the tax rate would be the same, and it is not really a disadvantage. I've mentioned the audit requirement, and then legislation. There seems to be changing legislation around around trusts quite often. So one just needs to keep your wits about you to make sure that you've got a finger on the pulse of the legislation to understand what is changing and what the impact of that can be. Okay, so that concludes my whirlwind introduction into the definitions and the pros and cons of trusts from a legal and a practical point of view. So I would like to spend the rest of the 20 or minutes or 15 or 20 minutes that I have to dive into the investment implications of that restriction that a curator bonus needs to adhere to. And to do that, I need to get a little technical, so I trust that you will keep with me here. I'm just going to explain to you how a damages claim is calculated by an actuary. These are the claims that we calculate day in, day out, and I need to give you a bit of insight in how that works to drive my point home. So what you're seeing there is a graph that is included in all our reports. And the context here is a loss of earnings claim. So someone that suffered an injury, and because of the injury is going to suffer a loss of earnings. And in this case, it is, in the example, someone that was born on the 1st of January 2010, so 10 years old at the moment. Let's say there was something went wrong at birth, and that there's now a claim against the hospital, for argument's sake. And let's say then, based on the industrial psychologist report that we've received, that this claimant was going to earn, and I'm going to keep this very basic just to make things easy, was going to earn 10,000 Rand per month in today's terms from age 20, and that he was going to retire at age 60. So the graph that you're seeing there represents the 10,000 Rand in today's terms, starting in 10 years' time, and then the claimant is earning 10,000 Rand a month all the way to 2070. Note that this is in real terms, meaning that we've adjusted it for inflation. In nominal terms, you would see this 10,000 Rand grow with inflation. So the number that the claimant would be earning at age 60 would be a lot more than 10,000. But we're looking at it in today's money terms or real terms. So I need to explain to you how this calculation works. And don't read through all the rest. I'll take you through it step by step. What we do in these calculations is we apply what we call a present value to future values. So in this case, let's only focus on the 10,000 Rand the claimant was going to receive in the first month in 2030. So we need to ask, how much will the 10,000 Rand be worth in 2030, given inflation of 6%? So if we inflate 10,000 Rand today with 6%, then in 10 years' time, that amount will be almost 18,000 Rand. The next question we need to ask as actuaries is, how much must I invest now to give me 17,000 Rand 900 in 10 years' time? And of course, the important question then is, what am I going to invest in to give me the 18,000 Rand? And what is the investment return that I can earn on that I'm investing in? So our actuarial assumption that we use across the industry as an actuarial community is 8.65% per annum, and I'll talk about this a bit more later on. But the answer is, if I invest 7,800 Rand now, and it earns 8.65%, then it'll give me the 17,000 Rand that I need in 10 years' time. So to walk through it again quickly, we project the 10,000 forward at 6%. That gives you 17,000. And then we discount it back at the 8.65% rate to get you to 7,000 Rand, 7,812 Rand. We also need to allow for mortality and tax, but I'm not going to go into that detail now. The summary of this is, for this person to guarantee that he is going to receive 10,000 Rand in today's terms in 10 years' time, 7,812 Rand needs to be invested, and it needs to grow at 8.65% per annum. So the question is, where does that 8.65% per annum assumption come from? Because it's important. The reason why it's important is this claimant is going to receive a payout, and we'll see later in the calculation, it's going to be around 2 million Rand. And that 2 million Rand now needs to be invested. It can either be put into a bank account, or it could be invested in a balanced fund, or it could be invested in equities. And the claimant needs to make sure that it's invested in the right place to ensure that the money does what it's supposed to do and provide the income that it's supposed to provide. So that assumption, the 8.65% assumption, is, as I mentioned, standard across our actuarial damages industry. And both defendant and plaintiff actuaries use this assumption. So it's a fair assumption to make. And it comes from the investment return that a balanced portfolio of assets can deliver. And by balanced portfolio, I mean a portfolio consisting of assets like equities, bonds, and cash. And this after allowing for fees and taxes. So one can, by knowing that, look at history of these asset classes, which is what I'm showing here, of equities, bonds, and cash. You can look back over 88 years and you can see the types of returns that these asset classes delivered. And then you can come up with an assumption that would represent this balanced fund. And this is where we get this 8.65% from. So as I mentioned, the present value of this example that we're calculating now is 2.1 million rand. So what this means is right now, if we can invest 2.1 million rand, this is where we are now in 2020. If we can invest 2.1 million rand now in a balanced portfolio that yields 8.65% after all fees and taxes, that should be enough to start paying this claimant 10,000 rand a month from 2030 to 2070. So if it is done in this way, then the capital will do what it is supposed to do. I'm now going to talk about the investment implications of restricting investment options and show you the difference that it makes between investing in a balanced portfolio of assets compared to investing in cash, for example. So in this slide, this is the same slide, the same graph that we saw earlier. And what I've done now, I've taken the 2.2 million, and you need to read it on this side, on this axis. So the 2.2 million is represented here at 2020. And I've now overlaid it over this graph. Remember, this is the 10,000 Rand per month of income that this claimant needs to receive. And I've now used that investment return assumption of 8.65% after fees and taxes. So it makes sense that the capital amount increases while there's no income being taken out of the capital amount. And then once income starts to be taken out, then the capital amount starts to reduce, and it reduces all the way to zero at the end when the claimant would have received his last 10,000 Rand per month in today's money terms. So this is what you want. In this scenario, the award would put the claimant back in the same position as he was before the accident, and he would be able to earn that 10,000 Rand a month as before the accident. So what happens if that capital is invested in cash? Well, the return on cash that I'm using here is a return of around 0.7% above inflation, and the inflation assumption that we use is around 5%. So let's say it's around 5.7%. One then also needs to allow for tax. If I use that assumption, it shows that if that same amount of capital is invested in cash as opposed to a balanced portfolio, the capital will run out at age 47. So the money was lasting until age 60, but now invested in cash, it's only going to last until age 47, which means that for this claimant, if he draws 10,000 Rand a month, that income is going to stop at age 47, and there'll be 13 years of no income, which is a massive deal. And the point that I want to get across, and I will talk about this later, but I can imagine that the question that people are asking, especially in these times of COVID-19 and what most of you would have seen happening to our equity market and equity markets worldwide, the question is, well, if you invest in a balanced fund, isn't this putting the claimant at risk, and couldn't you lose a lot of money by investing in equities, for example? So I thought, let's look at it. Let's take a market crash like we've seen now into account and see what it does. So what I've done here is I've reduced, if you keep your eye here on the gray line over there, I've reduced the gray line, the capital, by 10%. So a typical balanced fund would have lost 10% over the recent few months of the market turmoil. And then I've projected that reduced value of capital now at a rate that I assumed will stay the same, which I mention here is an unlikely assumption. So after a 10% correction, it is more likely that returns will, what we call, revert to the mean. So it is more likely after a fall in returns that you will receive higher returns going forward. But even making that unlikely assumption that it is not going to happen, this claimant's income will now last to age 53 as opposed to 47. So already this is showing that even if equity returns don't mean revert, which they are expected to do, this claimant is already will already be in a better position by investing in a balanced portfolio, taking the market volatility. We've seen a very, very severe case of market volatility now. So even in this very severe case, it still results in a better outcome for the claimant as opposed to being invested in cash. I also then just ran the numbers to see what it would look like if returns do revert to mean. And the outcome there is that even though that reduction, that 10% reduction is still applied to the capital that represents the market correction, if returns then revert to the mean, then capital will last to age 59, which is very close to the age 60, which it was designed to do. And the point then to make is that in a case like this, it is paramount and very important that a claimant then receives ongoing proper professional investment advice to employ strategies like dynamic withdrawal rates to make sure that his capital lasts as long as it's supposed to do. Dynamic withdrawal rates just means that one would dynamically change the withdrawal rate, in this case the 10,000 Rand that you draw from the capital, to take account of market conditions. So when markets have fallen, you would draw a little less, and then when markets have performed well, you will then could withdraw more again. So it's very important to keep a few basic investment principles in mind when thinking about these things, and I've alluded to them already. The first one is a concept of asset liability matching. So all that this means is ask yourself the question, number one, what is this investment supposed to do? The answer is it is supposed to provide for 10%, for 10,000 Rand a month from 2030 to 2070. That is your liability. And now go and choose an asset, go and invest in a way that is appropriate so that your asset is able to produce the cash flows that it is designed to do. So in this case, it would be that balanced fund that I mentioned. And in such a way, you are matching your asset with your liability. If you invest in cash, you are not matching your asset with your liability, because your asset does not provide the required returns that your liability requires. The other principles are that inflation is your enemy and that it really does make a big difference. So this graph here just shows the eroding power of inflation. So if you can imagine 10,000 Rand now today, let's think what that is worth. Well, no one's flying anymore, but let's say what it could maybe be a flight ticket to London. In 20 years' time, if we put that 10,000 Rand under the mattress, we would only be able to buy something that is worth, in today's terms, around 3,000 Rand. So we would, what is that? 1.5 tickets to Joburg. So we've gone from a ticket to London, a return ticket to London, to 1.5 tickets to Joburg if we put the 10,000 Rand under our mattress. And that is the eroding power of inflation. So it's vital to invest in a way that your investment, your asset, keeps pace with inflation and hopefully outstrips inflation. This graph shows you the time needed to double your money, and I'm just going to focus on the SA equities and SA cash graph. It would take you 10 years to double your money if you invested in equities, whereas if it would take you 90 years to double your money if you invested in cash. So again, just showing you the difference in returns available from these asset classes. Time and diversification are your friends. So in a time like this, where markets are volatile, we've seen a negative return. So those balanced funds are down 10, 15%. And as time goes by, we will look back at these events and we'll keep on seeing a negative return for quite a while. So those funds will show a negative return over 1 year. It'll show a negative return over 3 years. But then as more time passes, over 5 and 10 years, those funds will not show any negative returns anymore, because that market correction was just a small component of the much larger positive return sequence after that. It's vitally important to invest in a portfolio of balanced assets, and this graph just gives you a visual representation that shows that there are different asset classes that perform the best at different times. So it is very difficult to pick the one asset class to perform the best over a short period, and that is why it is wise to invest in a balanced mix of equities, cash, bonds, property, and so forth. So moving on to a conclusion, I've spent some time talking about investments now, but the reminder that we are talking about the pros and cons of a Curator Bonus over a trust. And I hope that I've been able to show you now that the restrictions placed on a Curator Bonus by way of needing to invest in cash has got severe implications for a claimant and the capital that is supposed to look after a claimant. Before I conclude with some more thoughts, I just thought I'll put in the slides and maybe quickly mention some of the case law that is relevant to the appointment of a Curator Bonus and a trust. The first two cases there are examples of where trusts were decided upon and used. So that means that there are examples out there where the master and judges are happy for trusts to be used. But I'm also aware, and that the third case there is quite a recent case from November 2019. I'm also aware that there's still quite a lot of resistance to the appointment of a trust over a Curator Bonus. This particular case, if you read the judgment, actually goes into quite a lot of detail in the comparison between a trust and a Curator Bonus, much the same way that we're doing now. But in the end, the judge still ruled that it was better for the claimant for a Curator Bonus to be appointed. So to conclude, the actual assumptions that we use as actuaries to calculate the loss amounts, the capital amounts in these damages claim are based on an assumption that the capital will be invested in a balanced portfolio of assets, and that yields a particular investment return. If you invest in cash, you are guaranteeing that a claimant's funds will run out, and that it would not do what it is supposed to do. Yes, there is a volatility risk in a balanced portfolio of assets, in that the assets go up and down. But I think I've shown you that the inflation risk, the risk of not keeping up with inflation, is a much larger, and it's a more guaranteed risk than taking on volatility risk. The example that I thought of while I was preparing for this webinar is, so now that we're in lockdown time, I was thinking you're in a game farm and you're in a hut and you are locked down. You don't have any food. You need to go out and you need to go and get food. If you go out on your own, there's wild animals and there's a very good chance that you won't make it. But there's a chance that you could make it and you could get to the food and you could come back and you could be safe. Whereas if you stayed in the hut, then you would be guaranteed that you were not going to make it, because you would run out of food. So the only workable scenario for me is you cannot stay in the hut. And the metaphor is that you cannot invest in cash. You need a trusted guide to help you to go out and to stay safe and to get food. And in the same way, claimants need to get a trusted guide that can help them invest in the right mix of assets so that their capital can do what it is supposed to do while still keeping them safe from volatility risks and being able to help them through tough times like we have now. So my question back to you, and it's something that I would love to explore with you. I know that in that last judgment that I mentioned, that there were experts called during the trial to testify to the benefits, the pros and the cons of trust and curator bonus. And I would love to, if you can see the benefit to the claimant by going the trust route, if you can see that, I would love to make myself available as an actuarial expert to try and convince judges and masters that it really is in the claimant's best interest to go the trust route as opposed to the curator bonus route. So my question is, could the master be more open to the idea of a trust if it is evidenced to be more beneficial for the claimant, which I'm 100% confident one can do, and if you can then find the right partnership of experts. And for me, that right partnership of experts would be a professionally qualified investment advisor. And I'm even thinking, I wonder if it would promote confidence if you can apply the same rigor as to the requirement where an actuary needs to sign off on a report. So why don't you put in place a requirement that the person needs to be an actuary and a certified financial planner with a license that is licensed to give advice, and only under those circumstances would the master or the judge allow the trust route to be taken. And then the second partner in this partnership, in my opinion, should be a personalized service provided by a professionally qualified fiduciary specialist when it comes to who you appoint as a professional trustee of the trust. For two reasons. One, the cost reason. The fiduciary specialist that I work with operate on that second model that I mentioned, so it is much cheaper than the traditional route. And then the second reason is one that I've experienced recently. My father passed away about 2 years ago, and the trust company that is handling his estate is one of the large corporates. And it'll make me too angry to go into detail, but I can say without any shadow of doubt that it has been the worst client experience I've ever had in my 42 years. And claimants in this position needs to have a personalized service where they know they're not just a number, where they know that there's a professional trustee that knows who they are, knows what their needs are, and that can communicate with them and make plans with them on a timely basis, and that they would not wait for weeks or months for things to happen. Which just leads me into introduction again of the business convergency wealth that I mentioned at the start. Again, it's just my heart and passion to try and make a difference to these type of claimants, where just making the right decisions at the start really does have a massive impact on their lives. So I'm able to give that investment advice. I'm able to partner with a professional fiduciary specialist, as I mentioned. I'm also able to be an intermediary when it comes to the bonds in favor of the High Court, so when security is required. My contact details are there, and the lifestyle-centered approach bullet there is just saying that the approach that I follow and I believe should be followed is one of putting the lives of the people that are receiving advice first, and that it is about planning for the person and not planning for the money. So understanding the person and knowing what that person needs, and to make sure that investments are made appropriately. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Let me have a quick look at the Q&A box here to see if there are any questions. I don't see any questions at the moment. I'm just going to give it a few minutes to see if anything pops up. You're welcome to also email us through any questions if there's anything that you would like to talk about. But while I'm waiting, I'd just like to thank everyone for watching and joining me in this presentation. And also for those who joined all the other presentations. As I said, this is the 8th one that we've done, and we really appreciate your time and your support in joining us. There are going to be, as I said, there's recordings of all the presentations, and please email us and let us know if you would like to view a recording of any of the other presentations. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm seeing a thank you for that. So if there's no other questions, I am going to say I hope you have a good afternoon and that you stay safe and that you stay strong in these next 2 weeks. Cheers.